Hi guys, so let's just start with coding for our fraud detection service. So let's just create a fraud detection controller just to handle REST endpoints. So we'll create a Java class fraud detection controller. Let's annotate it with REST controller request mapping. So we'll just map it to API slash version 1 slash fraud. Then we'll use SLF4J annotation for logging purpose. Then will this fraud detection service will take input as a customer ID, and for that particular customer ID, it will just check whether it's a fraud customer or a legitimate customer. So we'll do a get mapping. We'll create a method, so it will return a boolean. So either it's a fraud or a legitimate customer, so it's returning a flag for that. uh, Check fraud customer. So it's just a get mapping, and it will take input as a customer ID, and it will receive it in a path variable. It's a long and customer ID. So internally, it will call a fraud detection service to detect whether a customer is a fraudster. We'll just create it as a private one. Then we'll have all our constructor to inject this fraud detection service. So this service is not present. We'll just create a class. So fraud detection service class is created, and it will have service annotation over here so that it can be injected through all our constructor Lombok annotation. So in this fraud detection service, we'll pass a customer ID to check if it's fraudster. So we'll pass this customer ID received in path variable. We'll just create this missing method in our fraud detection service. So this service will return a boolean as boolean only. So in this service, we'll just define one variable of type boolean for checking for a fraudster. So we'll write logic in to do to check if it is fraudster. So we'll park this as in a future, but for now we'll just return a false value. So we'll just assign a default value to this fraudster variable as a false, and uh, we'll just send it back to controller. So we'll create a fraud detection history entity class to uh, store the result of fraud check into that table. So we'll just create one new table which will be a JPA entity. So it will be fraud detection history. So this will maintain the history for that particular customer's fraud check. So we'll just create it. So let's just annotate with @entity for a JPA entity. Mark it as data for adding setters and getter, then add builder annotation for building the object, then create all arc constructor, create no arc constructor as well for this. Then this will have few fields in it, like private long id. So this will be the primary key, so just annotate it with id annotation. Then generated value, we want auto generated value, so mention the strategy as generation type dot auto, so it will auto increment the id for us. Then create long customer id for storing the customer, then private boolean fraud fraudster. This is a boolean flag for this particular customer, and we will just store this timestamp when local date time. So we'll just store this timestamp when a fraud check happened for this particular customer. So just mention it as created at. So this is about the entity class for this particular uh, fraud check history. Now uh, we'll just create one repository inside this class in order to save this fraud check history for this particular customer. So create private fraud detection history repository and create its instance. Just mark this class as all our constructor to create to inject the constructor for this fraud detection history. So it will use internally constructor injection provided by Spring to inject this particular fraud check history. This fraud check history will have uh, annotation at the rate repository annotation, which will let Spring container to instantiate this object for us. So we'll just mark it as a repository annotation. Then yeah, so that's it for this class. Then we'll just go back to service class and create fraud check history object for us. Fraud check history, then fraud check history dot builder. Will be using builder pattern to build this object. Build. So customer ID is one which we have received. Then fraudster, for now we'll just use this default fraudster variable. Then we'll use created at, so local date time dot now, so it will just log the current date and time. So this is the object which we will be storing into our fraud repository, into our fraud data fraud table. So we'll just use, oh, we just forgot to extend it with JPA repository, so that's why this method will be a fraud detection history and ID is of type long. So now it should identify its methods. So save, and we are just saving this fraud detection history entity. So it's saved, and we'll just return fraudster value. So we're just returning the boolean as of for now. We have just hard coded this to false, but we'll write a logic to detect the fraud customer, and we'll store the real-time value for that customer in fraud detection history table. So now we are ready with the service. Now we also have our controller. So in controller we have got that value, boolean value for fraud check. That value will return it back from controller. So I hope we are ready with our fraud check fraud detection service. So we'll just wrap this boolean value into one Pojo class. So we'll create fraud detection uh, result. Result class, and it will have boolean fraudster variable. I'll use Lombok annotations, all a constructor, no constructor, thread data, forget to send sector at thread builder. So from this fraud detection controller, we'll just return a new fraud detection result, and we'll just instantiate our fraud detection result with the value which we are receiving from there. So it's giving error as we are returning boolean, but we need to return fraud detection result. So this is done. Our coding part is done for this fraud detection service. It's just returning a fraud detection result by which we'll be able to identify if the uh, customer is a fraudster or a legitimate customer. That's it for this lecture. See you in the next lecture. Thank you.